are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to give one last minute, about 60 seconds for the last folks to jump on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So just hang with us for 1 minute. Alrighty, well we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Michael Burke with Interdyne BMI, and we just have a few housekeeping items to go over before we begin. Oh, if I could get my PowerPoint to work. So here's our upcoming overview of our webinars hosted throughout May and June in case there are any on here that interest you that you haven't yet seen. You can find more information about all these on the events page on our website. And this will also include a link for registration. The next up and coming webinar will be next Thursday, and we'll actually be covering all the new features within GP 2015 and 2016. And yeah, this is the overview as well as the presenters for the day. And if you want to learn about anything more in Microsoft Dynamics ERP, we've actually started an educational blog series called Let's Talk. We started GP, AX, and NAV. If you want to check out anything about these as far as tips and tricks or more videos, you can find it on the website below. Okay. And then today we were going to be focusing on creating a new iMIS dashboard in the staff suite. And this is going to be presented by Tina Haglund of Interdyne BMI. And just the last kind of items before we begin is we'll be muting everyone at the start of today's call. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please use the question box feature or the raised hand icon, which are both located in the dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to be recording this session and uploading to YouTube, and we will include a link in the follow-up email after the presentation. And lastly, we'll have some time for Q&A with Tina at the end of today's webinar, and we'll be covering all the questions submitted then. And with that, that should take all the housekeeping away, so I'll change the presenter back over to Tina here. And I'll let you know when we can all see your screen.
All right. I've actually shared my screen, so I'm hoping that you can see it.
It's looking good.
Interdyne BMI. Perfect. Okay. So for the sake of the recording, today we're actually covering the iMIS creating new dashboards, and we're actually going to focus in the staff site today. And of course, I'm Tina Haglund. I'm the iMIS practice manager here at Interdyne BMI. So this is actually kind of a secondary webinar. The last webinar we had was on how to actually create, modify an existing dashboard, and today we're going to focus on creating a new dashboard. So we're just going to do kind of get everyone up to speed again on iMIS dashboards, what they are, what exactly you typically find in a dashboard. So the definition of a dashboard is we basically have a display that shows key metrics or key performance indicators, KPIs. You may, that's very popular. Everyone's into KPIs. You know, let's look at our membership, what's happening with, you know, all of our members. How can we tell where we are last year compared to this year? And that's our KPIs, those performance indicators really kind of helps us figure out what's happening within our membership base. And ideally, it's to have one single screen, although we can have multiple dashboards. I'll show you some examples of different types of dashboards. It's not only maybe metrics for maybe executive levels, but you may consider having dashboards for data integrity, for communication. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and I'll show you a couple of examples too, just to kind of help get the wheels spinning. So these are going to be the key items we'll review today. We're going to create a new dashboard in the staff site, although I want to make sure that you realize even though we're focusing on the staff site today, we could actually create a dashboard in our RISE site or our member-facing website. So as an example, maybe you have your board, right? They most likely do not have an iMIS login and password, right? So they would never log into the staff site. They would, but they potentially are going to come to your website, right? Your RISE site or your member-facing website. You could actually have dashboards that your board members have access to via security, and we'll talk about security a little bit later, and I'll point that out, how you kind of control that. So maybe you have dashboards for your board, or maybe you have a committee area with dashboards, right? So just kind of think about that. You could have dashboards for the member-facing side as well, like on your public website. We'll actually show you, the process will be we're going to create a couple of IQA queries, and those queries then are added to a content page on that will be added to the website, right? And once we have our content page, we hang it on the navigation. So there's kind of three pieces. You have to have at least one query, right? So that has to tell us it's going to be some type of KPI, right? You know, what's going on with membership in a particular state, or do we want to see all our members by state, or who did something this year but not last year, things like that. So once we have our query that kind of gives us the data, then we can present it on a content page, whether that's a graph or a listing. And then once we have that, basically it's a web page, right? We have to give it a home. It has to live on the site somewhere, whether it's the staff site or the RISE site. Again, we'll look at security. So either you can have a dashboard that everyone can see, or maybe it's just locked down to certain staff members. Maybe it's locked down to certain individuals that access your RISE or public-facing website. And a moment ago I said just note on here, right, that it doesn't have to only be limited to staff, although that's really what we're focusing on today. All right, so I'm making some assumptions. So today when we're doing our review of creating IQA and content, I'm making an assumption that you've at least seen IQA before, maybe had IQA 101 training, as well as what we call RISE 101 training. And if you have not, so this webinar is being recorded. So if you go through this whole training session and you're like, oh gosh, I see what Tina did, but I don't know exactly how to do the same thing. One thing to note is on ASI's website, so if you go to www.advsol.com, there are a number of videos that are being released, as well as there's a ton of documentation, and I'll give you another website too. So if you go to docs, docs.imis.com, there is also a lot of videos released there, and I'm making the assumption that most of you are on iMIS 20. When you go to that website, it's going to ask you what version you're on. Most of you will be on 20-300. And then from there on that main screen, it will actually have a whole section for videos, and I think they do have over 100 videos at this point. So then you could go look at how do I create an IQA query, how do I utilize the RISE site, as well as Interdyne does offer training classes, and I think many of you on this webinar today have actually gone through those training classes. So all right, so the things that you're going to see me do today, I'm going to be logged in as a full user that has system admin rights. So that means I can do pretty much anything within iMIS that may or may not be true for your users. So here's some key pieces, right? So when you're accessing the staff site, you still need to have that full user. They have to have access to you know, the different modules that they're working in, as well as within the RISE site, we have something called a Content Authority Group, or you'll see acronym CAG, right? So you have to actually have rights to be able to manage your websites. And whether it's your staff website or your RISE website, which is the public facing, you'll need authority to do that. And if you don't have rights in the Content Authority Group, if you have system admin rights, which is a role inside either the desktop or granted through the staff site, that will kind of bypass and kind of give you rights to do everything. So you wouldn't necessarily have to be in Content Authority Group if you had system admin rights. All right, so and to access the staff site, if you already have RISE implemented, what you'll do is you'll go to your domain. So in my example, it says www.yourcompanyurl.org/ and the key piece is staff, right? So that's how you're going to access your staff site. We're going to jump into a live demo here in a minute, but I want to just kind of prefix to say this is what we're going to do, and then we'll actually show you how to do the key pieces. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and create a new content page, but of course on our content page, which will end up being our dashboard, we have to have an IQA query, because if we have a web page and we don't have anything to put on it, it's not gonna help us. So we're going to go ahead and create an IQA query, and we're going to focus on doing contacts by state. It's very simple, and then we'll actually do an additional query here in a bit. So I'll show you a couple different examples, and then we'll actually take the IQA queries that we created, and we'll use the appropriate iPart for an IQA query. We use an iPart called Query Menu. So we'll show you how to use that, and then we'll look at some of the configuration, because on each iPart we have different options that we can select, and one thing we'll take a look at, we're going to go ahead and build out two different dashboard pages. One will be our communication dashboard. So maybe you want to build something out where you can easily find a group of people that are doing, something, right? I think in this particular example, I'm targeting expired members. So if I build an IQA query that says, hey, find me everyone who's going to expire this month, and if they have an email, I just want to send them an email. Typically, your membership department will probably be on the phone calling them, but you could also send them an email using the communication suite. So you'll have a really nice template that's already in place, and with an IQA query and that query menu iPart, there's an option to allow you to email. So if you turn that on, for any query you create, you can automatically then do a mass email to those that group of people, assuming they have an email, right? And then you also have the tattletale, which is the communication log, to say, did the email actually go out? So then you'd be able to look at the individuals who received the email, and then you could go back and see what emails have they received and when did they go out. One other note is on a dashboard, we're kind of focusing on queries and charts today, charts or graphs. You can also run SSRS reports. So just kind of note that as well. And then once we have our dashboard content pages ready to go, we're going to add those to our menu, or what we say inside of RISE, we call it our sitemap, right? That's the navigation. A moment ago, I told you, just remember with these iParts, if you wanted to create a dashboard for communication, we have an email feature. So if you're thinking, gosh, we could create all of these different queries and make it so much easier for membership to track certain things, or events, right? What if we want to email individuals attending an event 1 week out and say, here's a reminder, don't forget to bring so-and-so, or the bridge is out, so make sure you do this for directions. You could actually have queries that say, what event you're looking for. It'll look at the date and say, look at today's date and what's 7 days out, and then you'd be able to email and have a nice template, and then that staff person could add some additional notes, and then you could send that out. All right, so from here, we're going to go ahead and switch over into demo mode. We're going to do a live demo. So I'm going to change over to my staff site. So hopefully this looks familiar to everyone. I'm in version 20. I am in the staff site. Again, I logged in as someone who has sysadmin rights, so I have rights to do pretty much everything within the site. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is, I promised we would create a query from scratch. So you could kind of see, you know, bare minimum, what do we have to do? You'll notice on my screen, I am actually in the staff site on what we call the community option, which is equivalent to like manage customers in the desktop. We have a dashboard here. All of these graphs and all of these totals up here, these particular areas, these are all based off of IQA, right? So if you get down to the point where you're like, okay, I can create this IQA, I know what this is what I need. The foundation is you have to have an IQA query to start. And then from there, you can use the appropriate iPart. So here's a query menu iPart, right? We just tell it we want it to be a graph. We can add those. So we're going to go ahead and create a brand new IQA query. Depending on your version, right? So this is iMIS 20. It's one of the latest versions. My menu is over on the left-hand side. If you are in a little bit earlier version of iMIS 20, your menu may be across the top, but you still will have the same functionality and you can do everything that we're doing today. So over on the left-hand side under Rise, we'll have Intelligent Query Architect, or you'll also know it as maybe IQA. So IQA gives us a way to mine the data within iMIS. So best practice would be, if you're first starting out, you'll want to create a folder with your organization's acronym. So you'll notice I have one for Interdyne right here. Maybe you create one for your organization, just helps you stay very well organized, because you'll notice there are a large number of folders. These are all what we call system folders, and the queries that are in there are being used for either the staff site or your Rise site. So I wouldn't necessarily go and delete any of these items unless you are kind of well aware of where they're being used. But bare minimum, you're going to want to say new folder. I'm actually going to go into my Interdyne folder. You'll see I have a number of things I've been kind of working on. So once I'm in the folder, I'm going to say new query. And we'll call this contacts by state. And we can put a description, you know. So we'll want to walk our way through the rest of these options. So the first thing is we have to give it a name, right? What's going to be the name of our query? I would actually let you know, if you're used to using an ad hoc search, in a way it's very similar, but ad hoc within iMIS, the desktop, you were very limited into, you couldn't do very much. I mean, you could do a couple of like filters, but once you reached a certain level, it was very, wasn't very robust, where IQA is much more robust as a query tool. When you look at sources, the source would be equivalent to where does the data live in iMIS, right? What tables is the data coming from? Although we don't necessarily call our source a table, ASI actually has created something called business objects for you. So instead of you needing to know that iMIS has a name table and a name address table and an activities table, what happens here is ASI has created a business object called like CS contact, and what that would be is it takes name and address and puts them together, and it makes the assumption that you'll want the preferred mail, right? So once we select that, we don't have to know how to link those two tables together, although you can have multiple sources. A lot of times it will actually do the link for you. If it's iMIS ID to ID, you do have control over changing the links too, if you prefer. But typically when we do IQA training, we'll do kind of an overview of the most popular business objects and how they link together. And the best way to actually learn IQA is to do a training session, but then you have all of these queries. Remember a moment ago I showed you all these different folders. And there'll be a folder for events, and there'll be something for, you know, orders, or like commerce, which would be your store. There are many queries in there, so if you say, gosh, I don't know where to start, I want to do an event on event registration, I'd go to the event folder and look at all of the sample queries that ASI has already provided, because that will tell you what the sources are. So for me, just because I've used IQA a little bit, I know that I want CS registration, right? Because that's where all of my event registrations occur. But if you're first starting out, you could look at the business objects and kind of guess and then look at the data, but it's best to maybe look at the source. And there is documentation from ASI on the different business objects. And one other thing to note is when the business objects are created, they're based off of a SQL view. So if you are someone who has access to SQL and has some experience with that, you could actually look at the view and it will tell you exactly the tables and the filters that are being used on the business object. So all right, so I'll go ahead and add my source. Here we're going to keep it really simple. We're just going to go after CS contacts, which is name and name address information. I could scroll down, or I could use the quick find. I'll go ahead and grab CS contact. I could add another source if I wanted. I'm going to kind of keep it simple for now. Under the filters, since I'm doing contacts by state and my demo database is international, I'm going to go ahead and limit this to say I only want records that reside in the United States. So my field I selected was country. We do have all of these different options to say, is it equal to, is it not equal to, is it greater than, less than, does it start with, between, is it empty, is it not empty. If you've used a reporting tool such as Crystal Reports or SQL Reports or even Microsoft Access, this might be a little bit more familiar to you. Here we have a checkbox to say, do I want multiple values? If I do that, you'll notice, oh, now I have a list where I could say Algeria, Antarctica. Of course, I do only want the United States, so I'm going to kind of switch that back. And then we have the ability to prompt the end user, right? Because this is going to be on a graph, we do really need to just have our values hard-coded for now, because the intention is it will be on a graph. Later on, I'll show you an example with expired members, and we'll ask for a date range. So I'll show you something where we actually prompt and then use the communication suite to send out an email. But for now, because this is a graph, we're going to just hard code everything. So when we say prompt, we're going to say no. The other options would be, is it optional? Do they have to fill it in, or do we make this required? Make sure you hit your plus sign. If you do not hit your plus sign, it will not save. Just as a side note, we could add additional filters here. Maybe we want certain member types. So for now, we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to go ahead and move over to display. So these will be the fields that will be displayed. You'll notice when you select a certain business object that certain fields will automatically be added to the display. Here, I don't really need all of these fields. I really just want the state and the iMIS ID. So I'm going to go ahead and unselect the fields that I don't want, and then click refresh. And you'll notice under function, I need to get the count of the ID, right? So on my graph, I want to show me the state, and I want to know how many, how many records in the database actually are from this state. And I didn't really limit it to say, are they members, non-members? So this is a very general graph, but it'll give you an idea of what you can do. If I were to say, gosh, there's a field, if I accidentally took state province off and I need to get it back, you could actually use the selector above to say view all columns, and then this would show you all of the fields that are available. Right, so then I could come down here and select the field by checking whatever box I want. And you do have the ability to change the order. So if I wanted the iMIS ID to go first, I'd click here and they would rearrange. And then sort, maybe I want to make sure that my states are sorted. So we go from A to Z. We can do ascending or descending. We could have multiple sorts if we wanted to. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and say save. And make sure that I'm in my Interdyne folder. And I'm just going to call this contacts by state. And we'll go ahead and say OK. And I do want to make sure that I run this to make sure that I actually have data back and I'm not getting an error. And here's one thing. Geez, I have a data issue. Look at how many records. I have 6 records in the database that actually have the country as the United States, but they don't have a state. So that's interesting. So this could kind of help me with some data integrity. So now I could go chase down these records. We could go back into the define and we could actually show some detail. We could go back to our filters and say, hey, show me all the records that have United States, but the state province is empty. For the sake of this query, so I don't get the blanks, I am going to say, show me the state province. So I just went back onto the filters, and I'm going to say that state is not empty because I don't want to deal with all the 6 records. I don't want them to show up. So if I click Run again after I've added that filter, ta-da! So my 6 records are now gone. So we're going to go ahead and say save. So we kind of have step 1 of 3 done, right? So we have at least a query. But when you think about dashboards, even when we look at the that community dashboard, I probably have about 10 queries on there. So this is just kind of query 1 of maybe many, but at least it will get you in the right direction. So now we're going to move from IQA to under Rise, we're going to go to Page Builder, because Page Builder is actually where you create a new content page or web page. Kind of means the same thing. So under Manage Content, for your particular dashboard, you're going to want to decide where do you want to save this, right? Where are we going to create this record? If you're already using Rise, chances are you'll already have a folder created for you. I will focus on my Interdyne folder. You may have one for your organization already. So, but I'll click on Interdyne and then I can say New Website Content. If I knew if I was said, you know, I think I'm going to have 5 or 6 different dashboards, I could actually create a website folder called maybe dashboards and then create all the content under there just to stay nice and organized. So just kind of think about that. That would make it really easy to kind of know, you know, if you were coming into the site and you saw a folder called dashboard, you'd say, oh, logically, hopefully they're all under there. For now, we're just going to go ahead and create a new website content. So basically a new page, and we're going to call this our, I'm just going to call this, I know I'm no fun, I'm just going to call this my sample dashboard. Okay. The other thing is, if you've had Rise training, you probably know about layouts. Right now, because the layout says none, I have a blank canvas. I just have a great big page that is a huge square. But if I want to see all the different ways I could have my site laid out, or, sorry, not the site, the actual page laid out, this will show you. Maybe I want a nice block across the top, so I could say my sample dashboard, and then I could have a chart here, a chart here, a chart here. If you look through this whole list and you decide, oh gosh, I don't like any of them, or I want something different, you can actually create your own layout, and that is located under Rise, and there's something called Manage Content Layouts, I believe, and that will allow you to kind of create your own. Best practice would be when you actually create your own content layouts, make sure you use your organization's acronym. Makes it very easy when you're upgrading. We know exactly what's been kind of tweaked or modified. All right, so I think I'm going to take this layout here just for fun, and I'm going to use this first block, and we're going to put some text in there, or we're going to use the HTML iPart. So I'll say, welcome to our sample dashboard. And we can make this look nice and pretty, although of course best practice for many of you who've actually gone through training with us, you might say, oh, she just broke her own rule. Typically what we would do is, I just did something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I did select kind of like the font and the color and everything instead of using a class, right? Normally when we do a website implementation, we would work with your organization to say, hey, let's set up classes so when you are building out your HTML content, we assign it to a class, right? So we have something in the list here. I don't really have a, well, maybe let's just go with that, right? So if we assign a class to it, that means the class knows, so there's a file somewhere that references this YUIB, right? Yours would probably be your acronym and then like header 1 or something like that. But this information, instead of me saying, that, so this is Times New Roman 10 and it's red, it would actually live in a file. So then later on, a year from now, when you say, oh, we want to do a mini refresh on our website, we could go to one file and change header 1 that's in the file from Times New Roman 10 red to Arial 12 blue, and the site would dynamically change. So that's just kind of, I try to sprinkle in kind of best practice, especially not everyone has actually gone through an implementation quite yet, so it's just kind of setting the foundation for what to even, what to expect. So then we have to decide which one of these blocks do we want to put in our contacts by state chart. So maybe we'll just come over here on the left-hand side. I'll go ahead and say add content, and under the utility folder, right, all of these folder contains different iParts that are available to us, right? There is actually a list of all the iParts and examples of how they look out on that docs.imis.com website. It will actually show like the gallery. So that's a very good resource, because looking here, you know, you have a description, but you may not necessarily know what it looks like. But here I do know under utility, I have something called a query menu iPart. Actually, I lied. I think I want I'm going to actually do a chart. My next one, I'll do a query menu. So query chart viewer. So the first question we need to ask, we can put a name in here. So this isn't required, but I think it is good practice. So when you look at this, you kind of know what it is you're working with. And if you want a title, and I'll actually put title on here so you can see where it falls on the page. Now we have a couple of questions. Do we render it in design mode? No, we actually want to see it come up so we can see the data. Do we want a border? Maybe we'll put a border around it. Looks kind of nice. And here's like the million-dollar question, right? So I typically have to write down, where was my query? You know, this is similar to Windows Explorer, the way when you go to select, it will actually let you browse all of your IQA queries. So if I come in here, I know that I had everything in my Interdyne folder, right? And I did contacts by state. So typically if you're working on a lot of different things, sometimes I have to jot down, you know, what was I working on? So now here is kind of an important question, right? What's my data, what's my label? And you'll notice when I did the query, we had state and we had a count on IDs. So our data will actually be the ID, and we do want to do let's do an integer value. Let's take a peek at this. And then it wants to know the type. Well, let's just go with a bar horizontal. And then we have something called skin, which is kind of the way it's going to look. My best advice would be just to maybe look at one and then look at another. There is nothing really other than maybe looking at an existing dashboard to see what skins they're using. It's kind of hard to tell. It says glow, right, black. You know, you might just need to poke around and take a peek at them to figure out which ones you like the best. Maybe we'll go with Metro. I'm not even quite sure what that is. We could add some labels. Let's just kind of go with this for now and see what we have. So when we look at this, it's kind of busy. You know, we have our probably 50 states. I don't know if we have every single state represented here, depending on the data. But we can tell from here, California has 308. So Texas, 268. So we're starting to build out our dashboard, right? So I think the hardest thing when you think about dashboards is not building them. It's getting your organization to decide what your KPIs are. So what's important to your organization? And I think if you attended the last session, I referenced a couple of books. And so the makers of iMIS software, which is called Advanced Solutions International, or they go by ASI, two of the owners actually created books, and in those books they reference for either the nonprofit side or the association side. They actually had a handful of what very basic KPIs. There were a couple pages that referenced those and gave you some ideas. So I did offer up, I do have electronic copies of those books, so if anyone is interested in getting copies of those complimentary, let me know and I can email those to you. My email will actually be on the very last slide. And then you can just send me an email and I'll send you that back, or potentially if there are many people who are interested, I'll just send it out to everyone who attended. So, okay, so at this point we have our dashboard, and we just have one lonely graph, or sorry, so we have our graph on here. We could add additional, of course we'd have to have the IQAs built, but we're going to kind of go with this for now, right? So we kind of have the foundation for our sample dashboard. The last piece, one of the last pieces is to save and publish it, but then we have to give it a home on the staff site, right? So even though we have this piece of content that lives out there, no one will ever see it until we hang it from our menu over here, right? So I'm just going to scroll down and make sure that it published, right? If you've worked with Rise, you kind of know when you publish something, when it's red, it means it needs to be published. Yellow means it's pending publishing. It's kind of working through the publishing service. And when it's clear, or technically it's white, so you can't really see it, it means we're all published and ready to go. So that's perfect. That's what we're hoping for. We want to make sure that it's not yellow and it's not red. So our final piece for our dashboard is we're going to go ahead and take this guy and add it to the menu. So we need to go under Rise and then Site Builder and Manage Sitemaps. And on our staff site, right, which is the one we're on, you'll notice this one is, it says staff, right? One thing to note is we're in the staff site, but the staff site is actually kind of the main area to manage all of your other websites. So if you see this drop down, you'll notice these are all different websites that I'm currently running. So you may only have one website for your organization, but you could have multiple, and they all feed back to the same iMIS database. So if you think about it, maybe you have your main website, but you also want to have an event mobile site. Technically, when you use iMIS 20, it's responsive design, so you don't have to have a mobile site because your existing website will size down, but I do still see customers creating mobile sites just because of the content. They just want different content for users coming to their site that would be mobile, so it's not so busy. Or we have what we call quick start sites. So we have a number of sites that are available to you. We have they're basically templated sites that you can start with. So we have some for events, we have some for what we call our donor sites, or maybe you have a foundation side for the organization. We have a site for that. Maybe for your annual meeting you want to have a complete different site that's branded that has, instead of one page on your website about your event, maybe you want a whole site dedicated to it that has accommodations and travel information. You can have multiple pages, and it's actually a templated site that has a lot of this built up for you, and you can just update it with your information. So just something to think about. But right now we need to make sure that we have the staff site selected, right? Because we're actually in the staff site, and you can kind of tell based on the URL up here, staff. Let's go ahead and select staff. You'll notice that we have some locks on the site. This means it is kind of like an out-of-the-box ASI site, and it's locked down, so if we make too many changes, we may need to make a copy of the existing website, staff site, and just make it our own. In a moment I'll switch over to a site that I've created because that's where all my examples live, but for now I can actually under community, right, so we see community here, and here's community, fundraising, fundraising, you know, so you'll kind of see for every item I see here, I'll see a corresponding item over here. So under community, I'm going to say new website navigation item, and I'll just say my sample dashboard. The name of my content does not need to match the name of my navigation item. I just did it here to make it easy. And here under content or URL, we have to tell it, okay, when someone clicks on this particular link, what is going to come up, what web page? So what we'll do is, under Interdyne, we should have a content page called My Sample Dashboard. We'll go ahead and say save. And you'll notice a minute ago I said, remember, red means you need to publish. Because it's red, we will never see it until we publish it. So we have to actually click publish from the menu. We'll go ahead and click OK. Give it a minute to get through publishing. So I'm going to click refresh, right, because I want to give the a chance for the staff site to update. So now if I click on community and my sample dashboard, ta-da! I know it's not gorgeous, but it's something to start with. It should be just enough information to kind of help you get started to say, okay, I think I can do that. You know, bare minimum, you have to have a query, a content page, and add it to your navigation item, right? So that's our first example. I have another example that I'll go through here pretty quickly. We'll actually just do a review of the IQA query versus creating it, because that will save us a little bit of time, because I want to make sure at the end we have time to do a quick poll and answer some questions. All right, so remember, if we start from kind of scratch, square one, what do we need to do? Very first step is IQA. Right? We have to have some type of query to start with because something has to live on the dashboard. So if I go under my Interdyne folder, I created a query earlier called expiring members. So the end result will be, I want a page where I can quickly email my expiring members, right? And I've already created a template ahead of time that I use with Communication Suite. I think 2 webinars ago, we did a session on how to customize the order confirmation. It would be very similar to either creating a new template. I actually just took a copy, just like if you would the order confirmation, I took a copy, just did a save as. So if you're interested in learning more on that, I'd actually reference the recording from, I believe, I think it was actually last month. You'll see there was actually 2 webinars last month. Reference the one for order confirmations, and that will kind of get you up to speed on the communication suite. All right, so in my summary, I of course have the name of my query. If we look at sources, again, pretty basic. I'm just kind of going after CS contact, which is name and name address information. The filters, I have a little bit more going on here. These are basically, it's kind of whittling down that huge table, right? So right now I have everyone who is in the database, whether they're an individual or organization. The first thing I want to say, is this person considered a member? Technically, I could have gone after member types, but if I have a ton of member types, it's probably easier for me just to say, does iMIS consider this person a member? And if I say it's equal to, and I say, yep, it will give me every member in the database. And then I want to, the intent is I'm going to email all of these individuals, right? So I want to make sure their email is not empty, otherwise it's not going to help me out. So we're going to say the email is not empty, right? Was an option for my list. Is it a company? We don't want to, of course, email companies, and technically companies shouldn't have emails, so, but I'm just kind of making sure I don't end up with any junk records. And then I'm looking at the paid through date. If they are a member, when are they getting ready to expire? And in my example, I said, hey, let's look at kind of this month. Let's find who it is this month that's getting ready to expire so we can reach out to them. Whether this list ends up being an email or someone calls them, it just provides a nice list. Next thing, we're going to go to display, and we're going to identify the fields that we want. I show the iMIS ID, who the person is, their member type, where are they located, what's their email. Again, if we wanted more fields, we'd switch over to view all columns, and we'd add some additional fields. So I'll just grab, maybe I want to know what their company and category are. So I select those 2 fields, go back up to the top, say refresh. I could reorder. Maybe I want the category to be more in the 3rd position than at the end. If I switch it to a 3, you'll see that it moves. On the sorting, there's actually a field in the business object called name, which actually takes the last name, then the first name. If I wanted to then sort it maybe by member type, I could do that. So when I run this, look what happens. Instead of it being hard-coded, right, when you run, when you're expecting your query is going to be viewed on a chart, you cannot ask a question, okay? It won't do that, but if it's going to be run, and I'll show you here this in a moment, we'll get this on a page that will end up being a dashboard, but when we run this here, here's our records, right? Here's Bernard and Carly. Well, here's our at-risk members. We want to find these folks, right? So I have 2 sample records. All right, so let's go ahead and say save and close. Next thing, so I have my query, right? Step 1 is to have the query. Step 2 is to add it to a page. If I didn't want to create a whole separate page for a communication dashboard, I could actually just go put it on my sample dashboard. I can have as many pieces on a dashboard as I want, but to kind of do the process again so you can kind of see full circle, we're going to go ahead and create a new piece of content, which will be, we'll call this our communication dashboard. I'm just going to say example at the end because I have so many versions. I want to make sure I don't have something with the same name out there. And then again, we could change the layout if we wanted to. For the sake of time, we're just going to go ahead and add our query. It's under the utility folder is the iParts I'm going after. We're going to scroll down and we're going to go to the query menu. Before we use query chart viewer, because we actually wanted to see a chart, the query menu will allow us to return more data and be asked a question. One thing to point out, we could go ahead and change the name here, add a title. One thing that I think is pretty important, if the intent is this is going to be a communication dashboard, you're going to want to enable this email merge, right? Because this will give us the button that will allow us to email these members who are getting ready to expire. Again, we have to say, well, where's our query? We'll say select. We'll go down to our folder, and here's our expiring members. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say okay. We could add, maybe I'll add some quick HTML at the top, just make it look a little bit nicer. And this will be kind of a nice example. Right, so maybe we have this look a certain way. At least maybe make it a little bit bigger so we can see it, center it. So when I look at this now, it looks kind of goofy because I probably want my title at the top. But because I did it second, it thinks it should go at the bottom, but I can drag and drop it. And I can move it to the top. So you can kind of move these iParts on the pages around. I'm going to go ahead and say save and publish. So now I should have I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this quick. I want to see my communications dashboard example. So here we go. So now we're going to go ahead and add this to the menu so we can see it. Go to Site Builder, Manage Sitemaps. We'll put this under Community again. New Website Navigation item. Then we have to tell it, okay, well, where's our content page? When we click on that link, what should it do? The other item I want to point out is access settings. I promised I would talk about security. Okay, so what if this dashboard was super secret and only 4 people in the organization could see it? So access settings will be your friend. The thing that you can do is you can lock down this particular navigation item, or it can be done at the content level. Either way will work. You'll notice right now it says everyone has full control. You may decide, gosh, well, we only want people with a certain role, and you do have the ability to create brand new roles. So maybe we create a role called communication, right? We're not going to actually go through security today in depth, but we could actually create a role called communication and then go to those individual records and give those 4 people that role. Or in an IQA query, if you can think of the logic to say, hey, how do I tie those 4 people together, right? Maybe they're certain something, right? If you decided, give me everyone who lives in this zip code, they get to have rights to this page. In a query, if you could say everybody with the zip code of 55102, in a query you actually can say, make all these folks a part of a certain group, and that will be dynamic. So as people move, maybe they move to a different zip code, it will actually add them and remove them. But then in here you can add those groups. So we could say, if it made more sense to have a group, we'd call it the communication group and we just let our query manage it. That would be a complete different query that we're using for kind of security. That actually might be a good webinar. But this is kind of the area where you can control who can see this. The other thing is you can do this by member type. Gosh, maybe we just want staff to see this. Check, there you go. Or maybe it's only certain members. We only want affiliate members to see this. And then if you decide, gosh, I can't really figure out who this should be, maybe it's just the 4 people and they have nothing in common, you could just add user and go pick out those 4 records out of iMIS. But the key is they have to have, of course, a record in iMIS. But they would have to because they'd be forced to log in.
Hey, Tina, just a little reminder, we got about 5 minutes left and we do have a few questions submitted.
Okay, so I'm just going to get this guy published quick, show it, and then we will transition over to answer questions and maybe do the poll.
Great.
So I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And here's my communication dashboard. See, this one can ask me a question. When I click on Find, there's my email button. So this is kind of handy because now I have these two individuals I can email, and if I click on Open, this kind of works hand in hand with the communication suite. And there's my expiration template that I've created earlier that says, hey, we see you're going to expire. Here's a coupon code. Come back, you know. All right. So let's go ahead and I'll turn it back over to you, Michael, and we'll kind of look at questions and then hopefully have time for the poll.
Okay, perfect. So the first one, is there a library of iParts that is free, or is there ready-made iParts that you can buy?
All of the iParts. So let me show you this. Every time I go into a content record and you see those folders, those are also located under so rise and then maintenance, so you can kind of see a little bit easier place to see all of these iParts. When you have iMIS 20, you automatically have all of these iParts available to you. So if you were to look under here, under commerce, so you have all of these iParts that are related to the store, right, that are available. Communities, like contacts, a really good one, right? So if you were building out a particular page, right, a part of the RISE implementation will teach you how to update the profile. Well, we have all of these different iParts. So maybe you want something with a contact name, maybe you want picture, you know, blah, blah, blah. So all of these come with the software, as well as if you do a, if you decide, hey, I didn't find any iParts that I want, Interdyne, as well as many other iMIS partners, actually create what we call custom iParts. So if there's something that you decided that you need and the functionality is not there, new iParts can be built. And then they would just appear under custom. But of course, when I say custom, that means there's a cost associated.
Okay, awesome. Are their dashboard reports dynamic, or do these have to be refreshed?
They're all dynamic, right? So as the data changes in iMIS, everything is automatic, right? So every time I come here to the screen, if I look at my executive dashboard, it's dynamic, right? It's changing every time I come here. It's been changed, right? So every time somebody moves to a different state, it isn't, you know, it's when I actually clicked on the dashboard, this is what it was that very second. And if somebody's doing a bunch of data entry, will you need to refresh to get it updated? You will need to, but every time you come to the page, it's real time.
Great. Another question is, can you print/export reports out of IQA?
You can. So let me come to my communication dashboard because I think I have this turned on. So here's our IQA query. If you notice in the upper right-hand corner, there's actually an option when you add this iPart. It'll say, do you want to allow for this feature? Because sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, depending on the data, right? If you had a directory online, you may not want to do this because that means someone's going to get a copy of your database, right? If they exported, you know, they could keep doing exports of Excel or Word, but you can export to Word, Excel, PDF, CSV, and HTML.
Perfect. And then is there a catalog that shows the name and an image of the iParts?
Yep, a little bit ago I referenced docs.imis.com. If you go to that website and you go to and you select 20-300, if you type in iPart Gallery, it's either Gallery or iPart Gallery, it will actually show you all of those iParts and give you a description of what it is and the picture. When we do a RISE training, usually a follow-up is I always send everyone that because I'm like, we could spend all day going through all the iParts, but that documentation that ASI has is really good because it actually will show you a picture, and that's what you want to see. How is this being used, right? What does it look like? Does it make sense for me to use it?
Great. And we've had one more come in here, and it's, can you share other groups that have live dashboards on their websites?
So, will you say that question again? I want to make
Yeah.
sure I understood it.
Can you share other groups that have live dashboards on their websites?
Can we share other groups? Well, if you have a dashboard, and if you think about access settings, the only people who can access that is who have rights. So it's not really, it's not like you would share it out, you would just grant rights to another group of people, or maybe you have two different committees that maybe want to see the same dashboard. You would just add, you know, maybe you'd have a group called, Committee 1 and Committee 2, and you would just add those both to the access settings. So technically, yeah, they're kind of sharing the same thing, but there isn't like a share feature per se. It's more granted through access security.
Okay, well that wraps up all of our questions.
All right. I think we're running just a hair over, so um, maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to put my contact information up on the screen here for a second. So if anyone has any questions, or if you have a hard time finding maybe that iPart gallery, or you want a copy of those two books electronically, just go ahead and email me, and I can get you that info.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you for the great presentation, Tina, and the great overview about creating dashboards in iMIS. And yeah, if any later questions come up, feel free to reach out to Tina or your account executive if you'd like to learn more about anything you heard during today's presentation. And on behalf of everyone at Interdyne BMI, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.